After 4 years, my dad finally returned from his first space mission, but he's completely different. Ever since I was young, my dad talked about going on a space mission, about orbiting the Earth and gazing into infinity, about knowing what it felt like to be one of the few people on Earth who were blessed with the opportunity to be completely off-planet. The day he started working for NASA was one that has been living rent-free in my head ever since. A core memory, if you will. I think I was about 7, and the look of childlike giddiness and pride when he was on the phone receiving the good news was like seeing a whole new person. Gone was my stern father, who just in the last hour had politely scolded me for not cleaning up spilled juice in the kitchen. And replacing him was a little kid in a grown body getting the best news of their life. It felt like he was almost on my level in that moment, like he was just any other nerdy kid on the playground at school. From there on, and over the next few years, he worked his way up the ladder, starting as an assistant engineer and eventually was considered one of the most valued members of his team, making him eligible for the training programs for honest-to-God space missions. And as I'm sure you can imagine, he did everything in his power to ensure that this process started as soon as possible. He began training within a couple of months. I was around 15 at the time he started going through training, and I'd never seen him so happy and driven and exhausted in all of my life. He was filled with joy and determination, and despite what I may have told you at the time, it inspired me a lot as a teenager, even if my initial reactions were eye-rolling and cringing like the shithead 15-year-old that I was. He was in training for about 3 years, and after that he was off to the races and was readying up to deploy on his first space mission. His childhood dream was coming true, and in a way so was mine. I mean, I'd emotionally invested so much in his career since I was so young that it felt like a win for me and really the whole family too. This was an achievement that was widely celebrated, and I'll never forget the day I watched him shoot up into the stratosphere, clenching my mom's hand and comforting her, reassuring her. I turned 18 just a couple days prior and was definitely a little hungover, which kind of sucks in retrospect, but I still remember that experience as clear as day, even with the groggy remnants of my indulgent birthday party. The details of the mission were totally classified, as I'm sure you'd expect. However, this did seem especially secretive. Maybe it is commonplace for all employees to be under strict NDAs that forbid them sharing basically any information outside of going on a space mission. And I could tell this was killing my dad because he just wants to talk about it, all of it, but he couldn't. So we had no idea what he was doing up there, or how long he would be up there for. The space mission lasted approximately 4 years, which was greatly longer than I think any of us expected. In that time, I'd gone to college and dropped out of college and had a mini crisis of identity and purpose. I'd started a relationship, and that relationship ended, and he even missed the family dog's passing. It was difficult. As I said, we didn't really expect him to be gone so long. However, I'd never expect that the last time I hugged my dad goodbye before he boarded, that it was the last time I truly recognized him as my father. Maybe my expectations were too high, but when Dad finally came back, I was expecting this hyperactive, info-dumping menace to tear through the house with stories of the mission and tales of grandiose shifts in his perspective of life and the universe at large, but instead he was withdrawn. Very withdrawn. For the first week it felt pretty normal. I mean, the guy had to reacclimate to life on Earth after living in zero gravity for so long, and I'd read up about this, and apparently the transition process can be a bit rough for some, especially first-timers, and especially for long missions, more than 1 to 2 years. But after a month it was becoming concerning. He barely ate the way he used to, he barely spoke to me or my mom, and he spent a lot of time in the study just typing on an old-school typewriter. He never let us get anywhere near his study, let alone the documents that he was producing, and when asked about it he got tense, aggressive, and really defensive. But not in the way that made you think he was protecting his own privacy. It was more like a fear response, like he was trying to protect us from what he was writing, and the idea of us having any inkling to what it was seemed to really terrify him in a way that made it hard to even recognize the kind of person he was now. This nervous wreck of a man had replaced my dad. I mean, Dad's whole personality changed. He wasn't outgoing or bubbly or excitable or even passionate, but nervous, secluded, antisocial. He barely even spoke to my mom, and I could tell it was starting to wear her thin. She'd even confided in me about it after a couple of glasses of red one night, asking me if he'd spoken to me much or at all. Sadly, she was way more in the dark about it all than I'd realized. What the hell happened up there? What was he typing? Did he see something? What was the mission? These are all questions that burned in my mind, and it got to the point that, against my better judgment, I would begin to investigate this for myself, to try and snoop around his study and get an idea of what the hell was going on. At this point, it wasn't even about the excitement of getting a scoop of details regarding the mission, although that would be awesome. but about finding a way to help my dad be himself again. This was the worst thing I could have done. It was late one night around 1 a.m. Mom had gotten upset with him and they had a light argument, and he was on the couch downstairs, which gave me a unique opportunity to try and sneak into his study while he slept. I'm almost certain he kept it locked at night, but I'd been watching a lot of YouTube videos on how to pick locks and I felt somewhat confident in pulling it off. I remember the adrenaline coursing through my body as I tiptoed to the study. Something that felt a little juvenile for a 22-year-old, kind of like sneaking out of the house to go drink beers with your buddies or something. As I approached the door, I pulled out my makeshift lockpick, a repurposed hair clip, and started to very gently and as quietly as possible work the inner mechanisms of the lock. Every little scrape of metal felt like it was louder than a stadium concert, and the willpower to focus enough to steady my shaking hands was bordering on being more demanding than what I was able to take. But by a force of skill or just dumb luck, I actually got it unlocked. Surprised me. I exhaled slowly through my nose and opened the door to the study slowly, steadily, as to not irritate the dry hinges and cause a groan or a croak to echo through the house like an alarm. Once the door was open, I started to gently walk towards the typewriter and realized that I'll need to use my phone's torch to see anything. It was in the middle of the night after all, so I pulled out my flashlight and illuminated the desk area, and what I saw sent shivers down my spine. Blood on the typewriter keys and on the desk, on the papers he'd removed and stored in a pile. By the looks of it, he'd been typing with such vigor his fingers had began bleeding, but that didn't stop him. Tiny shards of fingernails littered the desk around the typewriter, and some of the blood stains looked older, like this has been happening the whole time he was back. It was what I saw on the papers that really scared the shit out of me. It's hard to even explain it, but it was pages and pages of numbers. Various numbers, mostly ones and zeros, but plenty of others too. No particular sequences or patterns, just lots of numbers in seemingly random order, like he was typing in a completely different language. It may sound odd or maybe even silly, but something about seeing those numbers like that, and the sheer amount of pages he'd written of them, felt like I was witnessing something unspeakably dark that I was not supposed to. Like my dad's aggressive reluctance to talk about it was completely justified and fully necessary. It was this primitive feeling that bubbled and boiled in my gut and made me feel sick, and I began to disassociate a little before the light switched on. Dad was standing in the doorway, and he was fucking petrified. Not even angry or disappointed, but petrified. He was more scared than I'd ever seen him, and without missing a beat, he asked me, "How much of it did you read?" This question seemed to kind of echo around in my head. Like I'd understood what he said, but I was almost experiencing it in third person, like I was slowly detaching from my body Jackson. "Please, how much?" Suddenly, I was able to snap myself out of this odd and almost ethereal feeling mental state and muttered a few lines, "I think." Dad's expression dropped. He looked like he'd just been told the world had ended and everyone he loved was gone. "Jackson, I told you, you can't be in here. You can't. You weren't supposed to see this. Any of this. I've been trying to protect you." His words trembled through my body like cortisol. The genuine tone of his voice told me that I didn't just make a silly and innocent mistake, but a grave one that didn't affect just me. The days after that were a blur. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I do remember sleeping a lot and having awful dreams. Dreams of lights emitting colors I'd never seen. Dreams of empty spaces stretching and morphing into hexagonal patterns that seemed to be both around and inside me all at once. I remember my dad sitting on my bed, crying and begging for my forgiveness, and my mother in the other room crying into a pillow. It's impossible to tell what parts of these days were dreams or memories. When I woke up, my family wasn't home, and outside of the windows that were commonly drenched in sunlight was a shimmering silver material. It took me little time to realize that the house had been completely boarded off, like they're trying to contain a hazard. What the hell was going on? I took a couple more steps, and agonizing pain shot through my legs and up my body into my skull. When I looked down, I was frozen in shock and disgust. My skin was wrinkly and yellow and weak, like I could draw blood by just lightly pinching it. It didn't even look like it was my body at all. Like somehow over the last few days I'd swapped bodies with an old and dying man. My toes were clenched together and folding over each other a little, and my toenails were bloody and underneath was yellow and black bruising. I tried to speak and call for someone, but the sound that came out of my mouth was a consistent, mind-numbing tone that sent me into a dizzy spell that had me passing out and tumbling down the stairs. I awoke in a tent that was surrounded by scientists and doctors in full hazmat suits, and I haven't left since. In fact, as I type this, I've been told that I'll probably have to be here forever under watch as they study the changes in my body. Nobody will tell me exactly what's happened to me, and why I am seemingly aging in different parts of my body, or why whenever I speak I emit that awful sound to the extent that they have a muffle on me like I'm a rabid dog. Every day I feel myself growing weaker, like I'm deteriorating. My family hasn't been permitted to see me, and I have no idea where they are or if they're okay. I simply lie here and slowly die as they poke and prod me and analyze whatever the fuck I'm becoming. Writing this has been cathartic, and I'm grateful to them for allowing me to at least document my experience here, because based on the way my fingers have been slowly growing into themselves, I'm not sure how much longer I had this form of communication left in me. I've run out of paper towels, and the blood loss from typing is making me woozy. Dad, I'm sorry for snooping around. I should have listened.